Well, you are welcome along to an extra special edition of the Huddle Breakdown, where you may notice that we have a different third person joining us today. After 4 years, and I'll introduce David properly here, but you don't know this, David. We're coming up on our 4-year anniversary of this nonsense that we've been doing with Celtic Analytics, with the Huddle Breakdown. And as part of a celebration of that anniversary, rather than dominating this show with just two faux intellectuals, we decided to finally invite an actual intellectual onto the program to make us look bad. So we are thrilled to welcome David Sumpter, author of Soccermatics, which may be the way that most people in the football world know him. We are here to promote his new book, which most importantly, which was just published, 4 Ways of Thinking. So we'll get into that a little bit. So welcome, David. I should mention 12 as well, your new AI analytics platform. I mean, are you an academic or what's going on here?
No, I'm an academic. No, it's
Okay.
a very nice introduction. I'm really pleased to be on here. Yeah, I mean, what am I? An academic? Yeah, I'm an academic. I am actually 50% on leave from being an academic to work with 12. But I'm also a writer and I enjoy writing. I just enjoy doing lots of things. And what was it you just called me? You're not a fake intellectual.
An actual intellectual.
An actual intellectual. Yeah, well, that's very nice. I've never been called an actual intellectual before, so that's fantastic.
Well, we're of similar age, and I'm one of these people that froze their intellect, at least maturity level, in puberty. So the analogy or the metaphor I like to use, I always get those two things confused. One of the great pieces of artistic work of the 20th century, Billy Madison, which was Adam Sandler's first big movie. I always use him playing dodgeball in the first grade. So that's how I view us. We're like Billy Madison playing dodgeball in the first grade relative to these analytical questions. So you're a legit dodgeball player. You're like a professional that can come in here and help us understand some of these things. So yeah, thanks again for joining us. I wanted to start off with I'm going to query you on a question and hopefully transition us into our conversation. So in case you couldn't tell, I'm an American. For our viewers that don't know your biography, you actually grew up in Scotland, even though I think you're based in Stockholm now? Is that?
Yeah, I'm in Stockholm, and it's very important we get this out straight away that I'm not Scottish. And this
Right.
is I was born in London, but I moved to Dunfermline when I was 10 months old, and I have a Scottish little brother and a Scottish little sister, but for some reason I always had an English accent. And we're probably going to get on to a little bit about that, but so Scotland is a place I have very, it's strong in my heart, and I'm back in Dunfermline twice a year, and it's very interesting growing up as an Englishman in Scotland, especially in the 1980s.
I can only imagine. My mother's from Clydebank, so my familial connection to Scotland and Celtic is through my mother. But with my American accent, I had an American-centric, because of course I'm an American, I have to make it American-centric, trivia question for you. So do you know the one U.S. president that had a published Pythagorean theorem proof? Historically, he actually had it published just before he became president.
I see. I don't know enough. You're testing me on my history already. I mean,
see, I ambushed you.
Was Thomas Edison? Was he as president of the United States? No, he wasn't. Was he?
He wasn't. So it was. I asked it because I knew you wouldn't know the answer, because no normal person would know this answer. It's James Garfield.
Okay.
And he's a little-known president of the 19th century. His claim to fame was that he was assassinated 4 months into office. And again, how am I bridging this into the conversation, other than the math, history, and trivia there? Because he was a fascinating guy. Grew up poor in a cabin in Northeast Ohio. But after he was shot, basically he was killed from the lack of sanitation.
Okay.
He actually had people going into his innards trying to, get the bullet out of his abdomen. And another history, an obstetrician from Hungary in Budapest named Ignaz Semmelweis was the first guy who figured out maybe we should wash our hands when people are giving birth. And he had his death rate of births, this is 1847, dropped to under 2%.
Mm.
And he wrote a book in 1861 where he was lamenting the fact that his industry, these professionals, the obstetrics, was not taking on his practices.
Mm.
There was this indignation. Garfield died in 1881, by the way.
Mm.
So this is 34 years later, where the world, this is after Lister, this is after Pasteur. Doctors are still ignoring this stuff. And poor Dr. Semmelweis ends up dying from alcohol and probably syphilis from visiting prostitutes at the age of 47 because he was having a class 1 argument with his profession.
Okay.
And this is the link to your new book.
Okay.
This was an argument that was worth having. It was worth saying, maybe we shouldn't be killing women. He called it contemporary irresponsible murderers and ignoramuses in his book in 1861. So, with that being said, how big of ignoramuses are we still having in football because they're not adopting Soccermatics? What is going on? Are we in a class 1 argument phase still? Are they still murdering the sport, or what is going on?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I think, I mean, the level of incompetence in football is pretty high. It's difficult, right? Because I think there's lots of clever people working in football. So I always feel like bad coming in as like, oh, I'm the intellectual, as you've called me now at the start of this. And like, I can come in and tell people how to do their jobs. And I find that the people working at the grassroots within the clubs, they're pretty smart people, and they're not smart like book smart or doing, they're not proving Pythagoras theorems and that type of smart, but they're very good at their jobs, and they're very competent, and they can explain things to you quite clearly. And when I worked with Hammarby, for example, in Sweden, I talked to the players as well about the analytics I do, and they took in that information pretty well. So at that level, I think that we have lots of very good people, but the people who buy football clubs and run football clubs are not always, and now I'm in the business and I'm paid to do this, I have to be a little bit, but they're not always as clever as they think they are. So they often, if I'm honest, we get quite a lot of people who say, oh, I'd like to do analytics on this club I've just bought. And they're not sort of ready for it, or they just sort of, oh, I've seen Moneyball, what's his name? Brad Pitt. He looks like he knows what he's doing. We need a Brad Pitt. You can be our Brad Pitt. And so that type of thing, I have a lot of problems with. And there is a lot of that kind of very high self-confidence, that exactly what you're describing in that we think we know what we're doing, and trying to do something without really knowing what they're doing at all. So it's, there's a lot of the people who own football clubs, in some cases, require a bit of improvement, I think.
Well, I'll let you in. I have a follow-up quick, Alan, and I'll let you in. So one of the concepts I started talking about maybe 3 or 4 years ago when I really dove into this was the idea that the industry was in its own kind of S-curve of adoption of these ideas. So, and I know you speak about that kind of, kind of superlinearity type of structure in your Soccermatics book. So, where do you do you think we're in the accelerating phase, or are we still kind of transitioning from early adopters into wholesale adoption?
We're in the accelerating phase, and I think one of the problems is that the phase happens at 2 levels. There's a sort of hype phase. So a lot of people say, oh, we want to get AI in to solve our problems. We'll get some AI in. And then they just take a random thing that says, oh, football AI, and then they try and put it into practice. But going back to what I said about the grassroots level, in order to get this to work, you have to get it to work throughout the entire club. So you have to have the buy-in from the clever people who are actually doing stuff on the ground. You can't just come in as the leader of a football club and say, oh, we're going to AI it or something like this. Now the bot tells us this thing to do. It has to be integrated into almost everything you do. And when we're thinking about that with your S-curve, there's very few clubs that are doing that. I mean, Liverpool are the classic example that most people take up where they've been successful doing that. Brentford and Brighton also have managed to do a big buy-in at that level. But when you move away from those clubs, it's hard to actually see too many examples where this has happened. So yeah, if there's, I don't know how many football clubs in the world, there are thousands of them, then you've got those three as examples where they've managed to run it well. And I think that the rest of them are trying to catch up. And that's where we see it in a lot of the discussions we have. We work with about sort of 15, 20 different clubs now. And 2 or 3 of them we're doing sort of fully integrated things with. So I suppose it's the same pattern there as well, that there's an increase, there's definitely an increase and an interest in it, but it's actually integrating it throughout the club which takes the time.
I mean, you've described 3 clubs there where it's very much sort of top down. I would suggest from the ownership being almost mandated that this is the way that we're going to operate. I mean, Liverpool were taken over by American people who had seen this operate at the various sports clubs that they also owned in the States, and obviously Matthew Benham and Tony Bloom clearly, that was they almost bought those clubs as a playground for those kind of ideas. So obviously we're Celtic supporters. Celtic are our team, and the way I would characterise, and we're James and I are very critical of Celtic as regards their unwillingness. I don't know if unwillingness is too strong a word, but certainly they don't seem to see the benefit of what we call modernising, really. And in terms of the football operations department, Celtic are an incredibly well-run football club from a commercial perspective. If you look at their financial accounts, you would argue that they're an incredibly well-run football club. If you measure it purely on sporting performance, and use the wrong benchmarks, you'd think they're a very well-run football club. And the reason I say that is what I'm coming to is that the way that I think James and I characterise Celtic is that the people at the top use the wrong benchmarks with which to judge themselves. They look at the number of Premier Leagues, number of trebles, number of Scottish Cups, etc. What they don't do is look at their European performance. Look at how are they performing against European peers. How are they even performing in terms of transfer model with clubs like AZ Alkmaar, Midtjylland, Bodo Glimt, for God's sake, right? And we're miles behind those clubs in terms of being able to operate at that level. But the people in charge just see the trophies and the medals and the trebles and think, well, we must be great at this. We're doing a great job. So my question really is, obviously you've come across, through your consultancy, through your business, you've obviously come across a number of clubs. How would you, taking Celtic as a theoretical use case, how would you go about convincing the senior people at Celtic that this is something that's worth doing? And I completely take your point about, I saw exactly the same thing in IT development. It goes through exactly the same life cycle of, this is a great idea. Oh, everyone's behind it. The slides look amazing. Oh my God, this is quite hard. Oh dear, that's quite difficult to use. Oh no, we don't have those skills. And it just goes through this. It's exactly the same model applied to many different use cases. How would you persuade a club like Celtic that this is worth doing and to get that senior buy-in?
I think I'll answer that question in a slightly different way. So I'll tell you how I think what we've done in 12 has been successful and where we've been less successful, because where we've been very successful is at this grassroots level, that when we can work together with either a data analyst or the coaching staff or maybe a data scientist working within a club, then we see that we can make real progress and we can start to implement things. And where we've been less successful is often talking to those, and maybe it's because of my attitude, where I've revealed my attitude towards the people who own the clubs and the chairman and so on, and maybe they're listening to this, and I don't think I give this type of impression when I talk to them. Anyway, I won't go into that. What I'm trying to say is that they need to have a much simpler message, I think, than often we've delivered in our company. And that's one of the things that we've been thinking about a lot recently. How do we deliver that message to the chairman of Celtic about what they need to do? And I think maybe a lot of that is about identifying their pain point. But from what you're saying, they don't really have a pain point. If they're very happy with how things are going along, and every Saturday they're winning matches, and there isn't that ambition in Europe that there might be, then maybe they don't have a pain point. But it's exactly as you say. I mean, you would want to you would want to look towards some of these European clubs who are punching above their weight. And I don't think there's any reason that Celtic shouldn't be doing that type of, they shouldn't be in the position, they should be in the position of Benfica, that's where they should be actually, because they've got the finances to be in that position. They've got the opportunity to take in players and develop them as well. And when I mean, so Benfica are still a selling club. It's only Manchester City and Chelsea who aren't a selling club. So they should certainly be thinking in those types of terms. So what we would normally do, so to answer your question at that higher level, what we would normally do is identify the goal that the club had. And hopefully they're saying, we want to be better than Benfica. And we want to be successful in that year-on-year way. And then it would be a question of how you achieve that. Well, you look at the players they're buying, that they're bringing in. They're very successful at bringing in players from Brazil and developing them. That's what a lot of these Portuguese clubs do. So you could look into those potential markets. How would you develop these players? And then, those would be the first starting points. And then we would look at, of course, how you scout them with data. So how can you identify these players? There is data if we went to Brazil or any one of these other leagues, you have data of players from when they're 16 and 17. So you can start to build up that database and be identifying who you should be talking to, who you should be persuading that you want to come to Celtic instead of Portugal. Might be a hard sell, Glasgow, Portugal. I'm not quite sure. It could be difficult, but there could be other advantages there. So I think that's where we'd start. Like, what are you aiming for, and how are you going to get there?
Yeah, you touch upon it. So that's what I've talked about. Is it's about I've called it the architect. You need someone at the top who's got a vision. And what I've seen, and this is, I'm not claiming to be a polyglot in any sense of the word, but one of the advantages I have with a Wall Street background combined with being a North American sports fan, primarily that kind of adopted football and Celtic a little bit later in life, is I've got all these other perspectives that aren't kind of industry centric. And one of the things that North American and U.S. Sports have gone through is the copycat phenomena, which is, it's not the unique selling proposition or, the LA Dodgers hired the general manager away from the Tampa Rays, who's, I would argue, the best run analytics sporting franchise in the world that I'm aware of. There might be somebody in cricket or something, or rugby, I don't know, but that I'm aware of. But he didn't replicate what he was doing, and his team didn't replicate what he was doing at Tampa. That would be asinine. Tampa has like 1/5 of the budget of the Dodgers. So he's taken what the Dodgers framework is and be smart about building. So to your point, what a lot of the failures occur is because they say, well, let's just go build an operation getting people out of Brazil. And it's like, well, what the hell does Brazil have to do with Glasgow? But there might be something else, and that's, exactly. You see that with Salzburg now had that kind of early S-curve competitive advantage in Africa. And now they're starting to have some issues because barriers to entry, a lot of clubs are going to Africa now, and it's getting harder for them to cherry pick the best players. So they're now pivoting to the Balkans. And, so this is the other idea is these are not static. Like analytics is about being smart on a fluid, continuous basis. It's not like coming up with a secret, silver bullet mousetrap.
Exactly. That's a really good point. And that is a lot of how we deal with that type of situation. So we talk a lot about the style of play of the teams that we work with. And then going back to this, that has to be down to what people are actually implementing on the ground. You often find that what people are implementing on the ground is very different from what the people who are owning the club think that they're implementing. So you really have to look at that at that level, what works. So if I can tell you something we did at Hammarby, which I think, because I've worked in this, we work with a whole range of clubs, but we have this brilliant relationship. We're also a green and white team. So I think you can take all the solutions from there. But what we did there was what we want to do is develop young players. So we want to take in young players and we want to make them play exciting football so that they're signed somewhere else. So Hammarby are never going to be winning the Champions League or anything like that. The budgets in Sweden just don't allow for it. So the first step we took is we identified what allows teams to play, what type of football develops these types of players the most. And then we looked at some of the successful teams around Europe, and we found that the teams that played very high-intensity football, always trying to win the ball back under all situations, it was from those teams that the most successful sales came later on. So then the next step, so we'd identified that. Then we looked to find coaches who implemented that within teams. So when we did our next coach recruitment, we looked at how those types of metrics we'd identified changed after they had taken control of the club. And that allowed us to then identify coaches who would be good at that particular style of play, which we knew would develop young players. And from there, then we start to bring in the players. So then there's a kind of natural progression here that the coach doesn't have to change his idea in order to help these players. He's just doing what he's doing naturally and continuing to do that. So I think that the whole system starts to work together, and you can start to see we came second in the league this year. We're still struggling to get right up there to the top, and we've developed lots of young players. We had one of the youngest squads in the league, so we can actually see the output of that very quickly.
I'll pass it on to you in a second. I have one follow-up with that then. So I don't know how familiar you are or were with the experiment at Barnsley. There's an American-based soccer journalist, John Muller. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Quite familiar with this, actually.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So he wrote that article about Skyball, and the way that they were playing was very radical, very successful, extraordinarily successful. But they abandoned it because, analogy I'll use this is, how we one of the things we failed during the pandemic was, all of a sudden, evolutionary virology didn't matter. If it's going to jump species, it's going to kill the new host right away. It takes time for these kind of radical new organisms, Skyball, to be able to adopt it. So there was no one that was going to buy Daryl DK. Or these I would call them more like NBA, NFL type players that are big, fast, but not very good on the ball. So they found this great, brilliant arbitrage and style of play, but they couldn't monetize it in selling players. So they abandoned it. So are you, where do you, is that kind of conversation going on actively at clubs, or is that so far down the road now as far as going for style of play inefficiencies? Or is it, okay, we're going to play 4-3-3. Everyone's doing gegenpress. Let's just do that and try to do it the way Hammersby is, versus what I would call more radical, which is we're never going to out-compete some of these teams playing 4-3-3 high press. Let's completely go radical and try something totally different.
I mean, I would just love it if one of these, no one has tried that again, actually. Or I think there's maybe a team in Spain who's trying, is it Eibar or one of these teams in Spain are also trying something similar. I love that. I actually talked to Daryl Morey about this because I don't think he was one of the owners, but Daryl Morey, he did all this stuff with 3-pointers. I don't have to explain to an American who Daryl Morey is.
I'm a Sixers fan. I'm a 76ers fan, so I know Mr. Morey, and a listener of Rights to Ricky Sanchez, so I'm all in on the Daryl Morey ecosystem, but go ahead.
No, I spoke to him about this, and he really convinced me that it's a good way to go, and you really have to go all in. It's something like that. I don't think it's exactly that, but on the other hand, you have to be able to change the industry as well. I suppose that's what he did with the basketball. He managed to change the entire industry, and you're not going to be able to just change the entire industry with Barnsley doing it for one season. That's the problem. But I do think that they should have stuck to that, because even if you couldn't, yeah, even if you couldn't like change the whole game to be that type of game, under some times into the game, often like when we think about the last 10 minutes, you want a player like that to come in that you can just lob the ball up to, and you want players who are able to do that type of thing. So I do think that it was a good strategy, and it is a bit of a shame they stopped doing it. So we did a small project with Burnley, who have not exactly that, but they basically they survived in the Premier League for 4 seasons by playing the ball out to the right back, then booting the ball to the left back. Now I've forgotten to the left winger, and then just like booting the ball into the box. And that was their only tactic. They just did that over and over again, and it was enough to survive. And it was very interesting to work a bit with them about how you scout those types of players. That's when it becomes very interesting as a mathematician. Like, how do you find those specific types of players who can carry out that specific strategy? And that, I think, is a real style of play. I think you're right to pull me up a little bit there on like what Hammarby decided as a style of play is like basically what everybody's talking about is the cool football to be playing. It's the Jurgen Klopp, but it really should be much broader than that. And I would like to see lots of teams trying lots of different things. And we have
It's too early. It's too radical.
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of, I wasn't trying to pull you up on it. It was because there's so much real estate still for the Bodo Glimps and the Hammersby. Like, we're so early in this.
Yes, exactly.
That's why Barnsley was so fascinating, because it was way ahead of when I would have thought somebody would have gone that radical. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I was not pulling you up on it. I was just there's such an outlier.
Right, I think about it myself. It's not as radical as I would like to see it, but I'm in a luxurious position. I can't go around, as I've already started on, saying that all the owners of clubs are assholes. And now I'd like to work with 20 different clubs, please. One of which does a different style of football, and I'll give all the analytics that I can't
Trust
really.
Me.
That's the meme. That's the meme that we will take from this, David, and we will use it.
We're going to put you in touch with Dermot Desmond and see if he'll fund your radical experimental ideas at Celtic.
He's a billionaire that doesn't like being called an asshole, by the way. so listen, David, just to build on this a little bit, but maybe dig into a little bit of detail. So, a lot of people talk about data analytics football, right? And it all gets kind of homogenized, I think. And I think one of the issues is you're not yet mature enough to talk about disciplines within this subject. I don't know if you'd agree with that. Maybe at your level, you're within your consultancy. I'm sure you do. I'm sure you have got specialisms with your consultancy of people that focus on various aspects of the football operation. But if I think of a football operation life cycle, and I'm going to keep this fairly simple and high level, I think of scouting and recruitment. I think of training and coaching. I think of opposition analysis. I think of match day tactics and actual what happens on the field on the day. I think of then performance analysis, so post-match. And then I think of sports science, recovery, and all those sort of things. I've probably missed a few, right? But to me, those are very distinct disciplines. And what I don't know is, and I'm interested in my question really is about the maturity. Is our football clubs seeing that as those being distinct disciplines, that the data set for each of those things may actually be different, and there will be commonality throughout them, and therefore you actually need different skills, different types of brains to really hone in on these, and then you've then got the integration problem of how do you bring it together into an ecosystem for a club that means they are being smart from end to end, from the beginning of that life cycle that I've described to the end of that life cycle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. I'm not sure that the problem is that often the problem is they're not integrated enough, to be honest. I mean, often there's a scouting department who are out like looking at exciting players somewhere, I don't know, in Slovenia or something, and coming home with that player and without a real regard for if they'll fit into the team. And so there isn't enough integration in that way. But I think you're right that there's different analytical problems in each of them. And this is why I got into the mathematics of football, because I always say this, that it's more interesting than baseball, for example, because baseball, you can kind of measure things. There's somebody who throws a ball and there's somebody who hits the ball, and that's about it. Sorry, there's other things which I don't know about baseball, but
No,
But
there
with
is
No,
nothing
you're
else.
football,
you're correct. It's much more two-dimensional. Yep.
there's this, no, sorry. There's in football. There's the style of play that we've already got into. There's different types of areas around recruitment. There's also injuries and all of those things, and you need those different skills, and that's what really motivates me. And I find it very interesting to work with those different problems. The way we work with Inside 12 is that we have a data scientist. We have a bunch of data scientists, and these people are like really clever young people. So most of them are under 25, actually. And they get to work on those individual problems with people within the clubs. And you see a few of them specialize in a bit more. Oh, look, I'm good with tracking data. I want to work with tracking data and understanding the movement of the players and the structure of the team. There's other ones who are good with the machine learning models and can make statistical predictions. There's other ones who are good at the visualizations. And we do lots of stuff with words as well now. So we're using generative AI and large language models. So there's some who are good with the words. And so it's putting those people together with the different problems that come up with the football within the clubs and trying to find those solutions that I find really fascinating. And I really enjoy joining in the meetings when they're trying to solve this problem or that sort of problem. So every problem is different. Yes, every kind of day we're dealing with a different type of problem. Just to make that very concrete, like what are those problems? Just like in my last 2 weeks, I've been talking about compactness in defense. So this is a very on the pitch tactical thing. How is the team organized when they're defending? I've been talking about taking in scout reports written by real scouts, comparing them to data reports. Now we're using large language models to write them as in words, and then merging those two. So we have a system for one club, Premier League club, we have a system where you can read in the scout reports, read in the data reports, and then it writes a combined scout and data report with a little kind of tip to the scout. Next time you might want to have a look at this. And something like that in a polite type of way. And and then we're working with the find players application. That's another thing we're doing. Like, how do you want to find particular qualities of a player? You write them down. How a player who's very involved, a player who's very good at pressing, very good at passing. You put in those different qualities, and then you get a list of players across the world. So every day I'm doing one of these different challenges and talking to different people, and it makes it a fascinating job, actually.
Sorry, James, just my follow-up question really on that then was based on, you mentioned that as an industry, you feel that we're in the kind of acceleration stage of this. Would you say there's any sort of low-hanging fruit left that's unpicked as regards the application of data and analytics to football, or do you think we've moved beyond that stage?
I really think there is, because the stuff hasn't been implemented properly in lots of cases. So it's like in one sense there isn't. I think just implementing a few of the ideas that came up and were written about on Twitter in 2016 properly within clubs would start to give you a lot of things. So it's there's a lot of low hanging fruit to be found there. And I think that's often there's a misconception, because there's these, even at Liverpool and those places, like Klopp didn't allow their data scientists to do anything on the pitch. So they're doing this very good recruitment stuff, but they weren't allowed to do anything on the pitch. And they wrote this article together with Google where they analyzed corners. And I don't know if you saw in this, there was a big thing about it. I mean, that was nothing to do. Klopp was not allowing an AI to tell him how to take a corner. And of course, Trent Alexander-Arnold, he took this wonderful corner, but that had nothing to do with AI. It's like, there's a lot of things you can learn from AI about corners and set pieces, but Liverpool weren't implementing that. And I don't know of a club who are really going to the bottom of like using AI for set pieces. We've done a few small things, but no one I've talked to is really got really got into that at all. The English FA did it for penalties. So, and of course they haven't. Oh, I mean, they lost on penalties in the final, so you can kind of like
responding to incentives, right, David? It's always about incentives.
but they, there was no one there when the England players go to take penalties. There is no one more prepared to take penalties in the world, and it doesn't always pay off. I don't know exactly what to say about that. A lot of people would say that that's just proof it doesn't work, but it's kind of they had an entirely scientific approach to penalty taking.
Yeah. No, I was reading yesterday about Midtjylland. Going back to them, they've got a set piece coach and a set piece analyst, and they have in real time they gather data from the actual match, and at half time they're allowed to change the strategies of the team in the dressing room. They say like we've tried 1, 2, and 3. We're going to try 4 and 5 in the second half because 1, 2, and 3 isn't working. They go to that. They're allowed to make those decisions in real time during the game. So yeah, I don't know
they were doing that.
Yeah, I'll link you. I'll send you the article. The link. It's an interview with the two analysts. Actually, it's really cool piece. So yeah, I'll send that to you. Sorry, James.
One of the things that's occurred in baseball, because it's much farther along in their S curve. And one of the things I've observed is that even some of the more modernized, sophisticated analytical clubs are bifurcating in their ability to develop talent that are hitters versus pitchers. And my thesis on that is you end up with information overload. So, it's the kiss it philosophy, the old sales mantra, keep it simple, stupid. And this goes back to the communication of some of these things, distilling from analytics. One of the things that we analytics people like to do is to peacock, right? We want to show off and make people know how smart we are, as opposed to like distilling it down to a simple concept that's digestible and usable. So, as someone who grew up playing baseball and played into my middle age recreationally, is when you go into a batter's box and you got a 90-mile-an-hour hard thing that can kill you if it hits you in the wrong spot coming at you, you probably don't want to be overthinking things. And that's an inherent challenge with more information, more analytics. I wanted to throw 2 by you that I think are still low-hanging fruit, and they're more specific rather than style of play. Well, one of them is pseudo style of play. The first one is I focused on this. I had a relatively brief period where I had access to StatsBomb data, and I'm sure you're familiar with John Harrison, who's been doing goalkeeper.com. And so to me, that is still low-hanging fruit. Decision making and actually valuing the components of keeper play, I think, is still hugely available for arbitrage and alignment with style of play and how to get the most value out of the position. The other one that I think is a little more esoteric is, again, this is just observationally. Look at things like expected threat, goals plus from American Soccer Analytics, or OBV, which is kind of the next generation with StatsBomb. Is it seems to me that the entire idea of strikers dropping deep to facilitate build-up play is a negative expected value action. Like when I look across the data set, if you're good at it, you're probably around neutral in expected value. And if you're not really, and that's like, we just faced the guy Grassi at Dortmund, who's like a mutant, like in a good way, like, huge, talented, good touch, that can hold, like the quintessential hold up striker. But the vast majority of strikers aren't that. And yet they're being deployed in a way where, just commonsensically, you have a back to the defense. You're sandwiched in between 2 defensive lines. You can't see behind yourself. The best you're going to do most of the time is pass it sideways or back.
Yeah.
Is that really facilitating anything? If, X percentage of those are going to go horribly wrong. And when you're going towards your own goal, passing towards your own goal, if that goes wrong, it's a bad thing. So even commonsensically, to me, it doesn't. It's kind of
interesting
like
in the context of Haaland, actually, with that one, because that's what Pep did the last 2 seasons, is move away from that, and they just we don't need to have anyone there. Just stay up there and wait for the ball to come for you and score a goal. That's all you need to do.
Well, and that's so in our world, it's Ange ball from Postecoglou's tenure at Celtic. And that's how we've deployed Kyogo Furuhashi during Ange. And even, so Rodgers has come in and had him do a little bit more of the dropping deep. and we
Okay.
signed another striker to change things up, which again, culturally, to do something different. And my view is, well, you don't do something different if it's bad.
Yeah.
Sometimes plan A shouldn't turn into plan B. It should do plan A better.
Yeah.
So that actually should be the way sometimes. So I was just curious if you had seen any evidence of that, because anecdotally, I agree. But it seems like Man City's onto it. And they're the ones running, like, have an astrophysicist doing geospatial modeling and machine learning clustering of tracking data. So I kind of infer that might be what they're up to.
It's interesting. I mean, I think, okay, now your 2 points. I think that definitely, but I also have to say, I think it's even more basic than that, the stuff that they can do within various clubs. I think that it really is even just like acknowledging the idea of expected threat about where different parts of the pitch are valuable. that's sort of the level we're at in various places. And what you're saying are very good ideas, but they go beyond what most football clubs are in a position to do, I think, or a position to implement, especially because of the coaches. So yeah, I've given a lot of plaudits to coaches as being positive and clever people and they know what they're doing. But there aren't many coaches who are willing to take that advice. And thinking about Manchester City, for example, Pep is coming up with a lot of that himself. He's not being data-driven. He doesn't go down to the data department. He has data scientists and he listens to them, and it's all very respectful and so on. But in the sense, those tactical changes are made by him. And so then when Rodgers comes in, I'm sure that he has his own ideas and his tactical changes. I don't think that any coaches, not any at all, but very few coaches are driven by those types of considerations that you're talking about just now. We can model it in mathematics. We can try and explain why it's successful afterwards, but we're still not at the case where I can take an idea. Well, I mean, I'm not saying that. No, it's not. I mean, okay, I would say last season, there was a couple of times when one of the clubs we worked with, we took ideas to them and they implemented it tactically on the pitch. And that was one of the first times it's happened. And when I talk to other data scientists at other clubs, it doesn't really happen very much. So we're still really in the early stages of that. We're more modeling the football, understanding the football. Certainly the scouting has really advanced, and the kind of looking at the match report, providing a very good match report for the coach is important. But where you actually tell the coach what to do based on the data, we just haven't managed to successfully implement that most of the time.
So I came across complex systems analysis with Mark Buchanan's book in 2002, Ubiquity.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No, I read that.
Led me down the path. Yeah, so that led me down to Purbach and his book, and then Mandelbrot and misbehavior markets and that kind of stuff. So that's how I come at all this, is from a financial markets and more of a risk management perspective, hypercriticality and cascading. So I have like a decision attribution framework that I've developed relative to football, almost in like a Brinson-Fockler style within investment analytics. And some of it's decision attribution, but one of it is also risk attribution. And one of the things that I think I've determined is that something as simple as the variance in opposition keeper shot stopping, season to season, can be up to 10 to 15 goals for certain teams.
Yeah.
And that, what I've found is that just normal variance gets laundered and misattributed into other things, which results in terrible decision making.
Yes. Yeah.
And we had that last season in Scotland with Lawrence Shanklin with Hearts. And that's, to bring this full circle, Alan's joke, they're going to be Analytics FC here, maybe, if Mr. Bloom ends up with his investment with them.
We'll sell Shanklin for a start.
Well, right. Is that looking at more sophisticated ways of apportioning and allocating risk and just normal variance, which you talk about so well in your book, is how do you actually attribute variance and decompose it into its elements. So I just wanted to mention that, because that was one I call it uncontrollable. So again, from a markets perspective, you have kind of alpha, beta. It's, controllable risk through diversification, and you got systemic risk. And so that's how I've kind of approached this. And I think something as simple as like opposition finishing and opposition shot stopping distribution on those, the same players in the same league, but just by luck, one team gets crap finishing against them one season and great, opposition keeper play. And it's amazing how much they can swing, again, disparity if you do an attribution of expected points versus results and break that all out. So again, I just wanted to throw those ideas out there, because I have you heard anyone talking about like it through the lens of like controllable versus uncontrollable risk and that kind of risk attribution?
Not in exactly those terms, but it's certainly, the one thing you can take away is that the variation in football is just massive, and it's really, it's you can sort of win. I mean, I'm not sure if you can win a whole season of football from variation, but I know from this perspective of like in the game as a whole, you implement something and you're unable really to measure what you've implemented until you've played about 15 games. So that makes it really difficult. So we're working on a throw-in project, for example, like what's the best type of throw-in? And it's like fun. You make the prediction, then it's a lot of work. You have to talk. You have to come up with these throw-in ideas. You talk to the coaches about it. You go through all of the steps, and then you have to wait 15 games to even have like the slightest inkling if your tactic is working. And then if it's not working, you don't know where in the whole process it went wrong. Was it in your data analysis? You hope it wasn't there. Was it in the communication with the club data scientist? Was it when the data scientist talked to the assistant coach who's responsible for training the head-ins? Was it the way that the assistant coach is respected by the coach? There's all those places. And then, were they carrying out? You can kind of measure that, but there's all these places where it can go wrong and not work, and then people lose faith in it if it doesn't work as well. So we don't really count it exactly in this kind of variation analysis, but I know that variation makes it very difficult to work. And I think that's different. Again, it's different from, I don't know enough about baseball, but I'm sort of banging on about it all the time here. But it's different there, where you sort of have repeated experiments time after time after time, very, very rapidly. While when you're looking at throw-ins in the final third, for example, you're only going to get a small number per match. There's always going to be restrictions in what you can do within that time. And it becomes very unpredictable whether determining if the measure you've taken is actually having an effect.
You should pilot it with the under-21s. And then, don't invest.
Use them as the guinea pigs.
You can contain it. Yeah. So
it's a good point. That comes up a lot, and it certainly is. It certainly is done. They have other problems that they're always they're swapping out the players all the time, and it's always changing, and you have kind of new challenges. Also, they all just play for themselves in those teams, so it's like they're all looking somewhere else. So
whose development team can I be in next year? I wanted to listen the bit about in the Soccermatics book that particularly. Well, there was another bit which I'll come to at the end, but the bit that particularly got my attention was when you were talking about networks and connections between players and the kind of mathematical modelling of that. And really, what for me, I'm very much probably turning into, if not have been for some time, an analog analyst, in that I actually collect my own on-ball event data for Celtic games at the player level. It takes a long time, but it means I've got a consistent.
He's crazy, David. He's crazy.
The reason I do it is because I know data, and I know that if I use StatsBomb one year and Y-Scout the next, the data is so inconsistent. The definitions are different. The method of collection is different. Etc. The meaning of precise meaning of the terms is different. I told you I'm a data guy, right? So I collect my own data, which means the definitions are the same, the interpretation is the same, the data collector is the same, the data quality is assured, all that, right? But I'm
Can
very,
I say
very
something
aware.
about that? Just before you go on, I just want to say because when I worked with fish, I had this colleague Ashley, and he collected all his data by hand. And one time we started creating these vision tracking systems so we could track all of his fish moving around. And he got really angry. He got really disappointed. He said, "You're taking the joy out of my job." What he wanted to do was sit there in the evening with his Excel spreadsheet and write down the XY coordinates of fish and how they interacted and so on. So you're not alone.
James and I had exactly the same conversation. He looked at me aghast when I explained to him exactly what I did, and he just looked at me and he said, "Oh, I'll give you all that data from Y-Scout." I said, "Right, okay." and he said, so he gave me all the data from Y-Scout, and I compared it against my data. I said, "This is rubbish. They are miles out. It's like it's a piece of crap. We can't use this, right?"
Yeah.
So I believe I won the battle as far as the data quality is concerned. But then you can have the debate about, well, does it really matter if directionally it's broadly in the right direction? Does it really matter if it's like not precise? But then the second thing that James says, which is absolutely spot on, is what you just says is, yeah, but you just love doing it. You just love the process, don't you? I said, yeah. But what I'm painfully aware of is that I'm only gathering, the 90 seconds each player actually has interaction with the ball during a football match, or less than that for many of the forward areas, and it's all the stuff that happens off the ball. That's to me the panacea. So, and this speaks to what you were talking about in terms of modelling movement, in terms of GPS tracking players' runs off the ball, etc. Because what I would love to do, and I've seen a glimpse of it with StatsBomb. I don't know if you've ever worked with StatsBomb, but I just got a sense that you'd had some dealings with StatsBomb at some point in your career. Is StatsBomb came up with this, to James's point about goalkeeping, which is a low-hanging fruit area that's very underdeveloped, that area, is they've come up with this positional error metric. And so what they do is they look at every shot that the goalkeeper faces on target, and they work out an optimal position that the goalkeeper should have been in to have had the best chance to have saved that shot. And then they measure the actual variance of the goalkeeper from to that position. I think that's brilliant. What I would love to have have access to is exactly that same metric, but for every player on the pitch. So that when you're defending your box, and your strategy is to have like a 4-4-2 medium block. As a coach, you've got an idea of just how narrow you want your team to be and how compact you want to be, and you can probably specify what your requirements are. And therefore, if you have the ability to actually measure how compact are we, how spatially near to each of the other defenders is the player, who's the one that has the greatest positional errors, or who's got the least positional errors, that to me would be wonderful, because it would allow you to track pressing effectiveness, defensive shape, transition on the ball, off the ball, etc. But also even from an attacking point, if you're a highly positional coach that has almost like Pep Guardiola, that has almost pre-rehearsed moves that everyone has to do, you can say, well, that's the optimal run at that point. You should have overlapped the fullback and then cut in. How close were you to that optimal line? I would absolutely love to get hold of all that stuff. Is that stuff that is under development, or am I talking like 20 years
I'm making
away?
you very jealous. But I do have that data. So we work with a couple of clubs in the Premier League with exactly that data, and that is where I said, we've done a few things where we can actually give really good input to the coach, like exactly as you say, you're trying to achieve this. This player is out of the you want to have a particular type of shape. This player is out of position. He should be moving over to here. Those types of tools are things that we're now starting to create and are actually having an impact. So I think that, I'm sorry to make you jealous in this way, but that's
well. I just wonder when could it be available to free to nets like me?
A lot of news about making it available to the public, which is a bit of a shame. And I don't really know the legals ins and outs of it, but for some reason there's a worry that it's considered to be personal data. And so when we get access to that data, we sign we wait a couple of years and sign pages and pages of different types of agreements and so on about what we can say about it and what we can use about it. And sometimes they say the reason they can't release it more widely is to do with it that it is personal data, while the event data for some reason isn't personal data. I don't know exactly where that distinction is. But it is only recently that clubs are making good use of that type of data. I think it's not that it's been kept secret because it's being used in some kind of hyper secretive program of research or something like that. It's just a little bit to do with the legal issues. A little bit is in nobody's interest who owns the data to release it. But it should be. Yeah. It's a shame that it isn't more widely available, because then there would be more publicly available things. People like yourself could sit and play around and do things with that data. So but it's definitely something, and exactly what you're describing is exactly what we've done in some cases, and it's one of the most fun parts of doing it. It relates back to what we used to be able to do with the fish and the birds, and understanding all of their movements together, which was equally as fascinating as football players. But we can do that type of stuff and get the coach to what you can do with football players that you can't do with fish, is you can tell them that they were moving wrong and get them to move back into position. And it's very nice when we can get a project like that to be successful.
Got it. So I had one more question, really, which was, more of a sort of pet project, really, but interested to see if it's something you or your consultancy have ever looked at. So, as you know, being born in Scotland, probably being at least aware of Scottish football, you'll know that it's idiosyncratic, to say the least, for various cultural reasons. And so, long story short, is I developed a framework for analysing refereeing performances, with a view to seeing whether potentially there was unconscious biases at play in terms of decision making. I just wondered if that was something which you'd ever been asked to do as a consultancy or a friend.
Right. Okay. Yeah, one of the first things like clubs ask to do. I mean,
excellent.
I don't really. Yeah, I'm not sure I really love doing that one, but we got asked to. Like the decisions, is the referee making decisions against us or something like that? Did we get an unexpectedly large number of penalties against us? It's always negative decisions. No one wants to know, are we getting too many lucky decisions in our case?
David, blink twice if it was a Turkish club involved with a price a fixing scandal. No, okay.
If you like, we should at least compare frameworks and see what data points they're collecting. And if any of your team want to critique my framework, I'd be happy for them to do it.
No, well, I'm very interested. Yeah, actually, maybe I'll send it over to you. The next one, next time I get asked, you can do your analysis.
Excellent.
Yeah. I mean,
listen, one last little thing I just wanted to say, really. So, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure for me to have you on.
Thank you. I did want to say about that.
Yeah, sorry, go. Yeah, go.
Because there is, one study we did, which I thought was really nice, is we had this player who was getting sent off too much at Hammarby, and Jeppe Andersson. And I got the job of telling Jeppe Andersson to stop getting sent off all of the time. And he wasn't, when I approached him to tell him this, he wasn't at all pleased. But there is, he was arguing, he was saying, because he was getting sent off for 2 yellows, and he was arguing that the first yellow he was taking was like a tactical yellow. But he was taking these tactical yellows after 7 minutes, and so I worked out when you could take a tactical yellow card, what the expected threat you should be in a position. And I think you should be in a sort of, until you take your tactical yellow, it has to be something like a 15% chance of goal at least 60 minutes into the match before you should take it. And I didn't explain it in exactly those terms to him.
Wow, that's really interesting.
So the defender's got an XG model in his head as he's about to make a challenge.
So next time, before you get your red card, just so you get your first yellow, but you can actually see the value. You lose value in getting that yellow card because you can't take the yellow card in the future when it might be another point. And so we could work out what were good situations to take a yellow card and what were bad situations to take a yellow card. And even when you can work out when to take a red card. In the last 10 minutes of the match, you should take a red card. And I don't know, I'm not sure. I've never advised a player to do that. I think that would be up to the coach to say it, but purely mathematically, the last 10 minutes, because I think it's 60 minutes, you lose 1 goal for 60 minutes of 10 men.
Oh, wow.
So that means that, if you've got 10 minutes left to play, and you're going to giving away a penalty, you can even give away a penalty in the last. Yeah, wait a minute. No, you don't want to give away a penalty. No, but you should take this if you're going to prevent some kind of large chance of scoring. Giving away a penalty, I suppose, the last minute or something like that, you could do that if it's definitely going to be a goal. But you can work those types of things out.
Brilliant. So listen, the last thing from me is, and because you're living this best life, and you've got all this tracking data, and I'm really jealous. My last point, I have to get back at you with a little bit of one-upmanship, right? So listen, my favorite part of your book of all was when you told the story at the beginning. I think it was, I can't remember if it was your brother or your pal playing Subbuteo, right?
Yeah.
And how you had all these competitions mapped out, and then you realised that. Yeah, by the way, Subbuteo is actually alive and flicking, right? It's actually going through a bit of a renaissance. So I'm an avid collector, and I play all these solo leagues as well. So I'm with you 100%, right? So when you were setting up all these leagues and you're playing all these games, and you realise you didn't have enough time to play these games, and then you said that you started to develop ways of simulating matches through dice, and then you realised that wasn't really very realistic, and then you started looking at actual goals and building a sort of predictive model. That I have to say to you, that is exactly the journey I went through as a child.
Wow.
But even more amazing than this, because I'm older than you, right? So I did this before you. So it was where the one-upmanship came in, right? So I was in Falkirk, right, and you were in Dunfermline. I know there's a lot of rivalry between the two, but I reckon I was being plagiarised here, right? So I had these dice, and I had these 10-sided dice. So listen, I was actually working out probabilities before I even knew what probabilities were, right? And then I moved on to actually building a model based on actual goals scored. And I still use that today, believe it or not. So I think just to show you, just to kind of, my aim here is to humiliate you. Is not only to accuse you of plagiarism, right? But is that I failed my O-level maths, right? And I got a C the second time round. So not only have you plagiarised me, but you've plagiarised a mathematical idiot.
Well,
listen,
maybe say more about O-level maths actually than anything else. But I think that's
how badly it's taught in school is what it is.
Yes, exactly.
Well, we want to wrap up. I'm sorry, David, go ahead.
I like that you brought up the Subbuteo story, because the person I played Subbuteo with those years ago, his name's David Patterson, and he is a crazy Celtic fan. He is obsessed with Celtic. Brilliant. So he was just like had this entire green and white room when we were growing up, and it was very, very important to him. And he's also an accountant, and so he's probably listening to your podcast, I can imagine.
Excellent! I'll look out for it. Hi. David Patterson, brilliant. So listen, David, my last bit of advice, having abused you, then, is go up to your loft, get your Subbuteo out, and start playing again.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I want to. I know you have a PhD or a world famous author, but maybe one of the greatest honors you're about to receive is an honorary spreadsheet shagger from the Huddle Breakdown. That's what we like to call ourselves, spreadsheet shaggers. And we want to thank you for joining us. But most importantly, I'm going to promote your new book again, so everyone go out and buy it. And my last question: you mentioned this is. Whether we keep promoting your book in the future, so this has consequences. The answer,
okay.
Is you mentioned you have a friend who's a Celtic fan, but you have two brothers that sounds like were born in Scotland.
A brother and a sister.
A brother and a sister. Okay.
And my
do they have a supporting? What's going on here?
Okay, I'll tell. So I mean, we're Dunfermline fans, we're Pals fans. The whole family.
That's the cowardly answer, David.
I will say this, and I wanted to bring this up also, that so my sister lives in Glasgow, and she's married to a Glaswegian, And he's not, I mean, he would be more Celtic than the other one that I won't mention, but his best friend's sister works for Glasgow City. And I also have another relationship into that. And one of our 12 data scientists works for Glasgow City, plays for Glasgow City.
Oh, excellent.
Great.
Nicole Kozlova. She's their striker, actually. She's very good at hold-up play. And and scores lots of goals there. So I'm going to finally say that, unfortunately, I think Glasgow City is the one in my heart right now, more than anyone else.
We'll take that. Well, thank you so much once again. More than generous with your time here, and your good-natured cheer in taking all of our questions. So thanks again, and really, maybe we'll get to speak to you again in the future with your next book to promote. You have another book in the pipeline?
Exactly. I'll be no books. Too much football, I'm afraid. So we'll see.
Okay. Take care. Thanks, David.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Bye.